Hello and welcome back to Council Island, your go-to source for everything going down at City Hall. We've got an interesting council meeting coming up this month before council breaks for August. So Denis and I wanted to sit down and talk about that. But first, there's been some sort of rodeo or something happening. I've never heard of this event, the Calgary Stampede. Denis, have you been doing any stampeding?
Yeah, I've done some. Nothing like last year when I had not one but two political candidates to staff. So that was a pretty intensive grind. You just follow them around. Worse for them because they have to talk to everybody. But so last, it was the first breakfast at 7 a.m. and then like 15-minute drive over to the next breakfast. We go 8:15 to 9:30, and then over get the tail end of the next breakfast, and then brief break for like lunch break where you don't actually eat any food, and then it's like afternoon networking event, and then evening community barbecue or something like that, and probably two afternoon networking events, and probably two evening community barbecues or afternoon or networking events, and so just spot to spot to spot. This time the candidate has to do. There's a ton of different events for these. There's community events. There's the networking events downtown. There's the actual Stampede events, the stuff like on the rodeo grounds all that or stuff on the actual Stampede grounds, all the rodeo stuff. And then there's like a bunch of kind of corporate events, which are not necessarily GR, but like, the Toyota dealership gives out pancakes as kind of like an advertising thing. So just like the raw amount of stuff to do is kind of crazy, and you have to pick and choose where you want to go. So what political candidates do is they try to focus on all the community events in their community where voters are going to be. So you need to like find every single one of them, every church, every community association, every school that's doing one, and go to all of those. But you also need to go to the downtown kind of government relations circuit and work some of the ones that are where the politically engaged people are out, where there's a community organization that might have like a big volunteer base. You have to go to all those. And so this year, I went to a couple of my community. I went to a couple of the political ones. I volunteered a couple of the political ones, like setting stuff up, cleaning up, just staying in touch with some of the people that I know. And I did some of the networking ones in the energy sector where I have previously worked, and I sort of have some connections and see what's going on, if there's anything interesting happening, talk to people, sort of hear the gossip, catch up with friends. And people are always pitching something at these, like, get involved in my renewable energy business, or like we should change the policy in this way. They're looking to like influence the minister or somebody who's there. So mine was like somewhat busy, but much lighter because I wasn't like working that constant grindy schedule. How about you? I
Yeah.
mean, you had to do the grind as a candidate last year, so you hit like every single event and just talk to people, talk to people, talk to people. I saw you at a couple things this year. How was your Stampede?
Yeah, my stampede has been peaceful. It's
Nice.
it's been beautiful. I'm I enjoy it much more when I'm not the candidate, and it's not an election year, and it's just kind of like if I choose to go to something, it's because I wanted to go to that. I didn't even go to my neighborhood, my local pancake breakfast. I wanted to, but I woke up that morning and I was tired, so I just said, I gotta sleep. I think the sleep is more important than the pancakes, even though pancake breakfasts are a bit of a sacred thing for me, and I love my community as well. But I liked being able to choose sleep over the political petting zoo, which was very nice. So I wound up going to one political event, one Stampede political event. That was the Equal Voice event, and I did a little bit of chatting about transit with some MLAs and with the mayor and with some other folks who I saw there. Of course, lots of friends there. I saw you there. I saw Nam there. So that was nice. And I had a rising migraine the whole time, and so I went home and I slept for the whole rest of the day. So my Stampede has been mostly not stampeding. I am going to Stampede tonight. We're recording this on Sunday the 12th. It's the my friend in the show band. It's his last performance since he's aging out, and so I'm going to go see the show band and maybe hang around for the fireworks. We'll wait and see. I'm going with a couple friends, so we'll see. But it's been nice. It's been nice. I also took a couple friends from Memphis, from out of town, to Stampede to show them. Yeah, it was nice. It was nice and mostly non-political. So I actually enjoyed it a little bit more this year, in some ways at least. There is something fun about the like, oh, we have to go and we have to talk to everybody and we have to like. There's something fun about that, but I enjoy the peace and quiet too.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's not a relaxing fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of not a relaxing fun, we find speaking at City Council to be fun in its own way, maybe. It is something that brings us together every couple months when there's something that it's like, oh my goodness, I got to show up again just to say like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Like, why is this a song and dance every single time these sorts of things come up? But we've got in a couple weeks coming up on the 21st, is it? Is that right?
July 21st.
July 21st, we've got a big council meeting coming up, and there's a few different things happening there. There are 3 things that we're going to talk about on this podcast. Briefly, there's some changes potentially coming to suites, to secondary suites. There is also a potential change proposed for the RCG land use, the RCG, the gift that keeps on giving. And then there is a specific development that has a lot of people up in arms for what I will say right up front. Kind of silly reasons, if you ask me. This is the sort of housing project that people have been asking for, and we need to see these things happening. But Denis, let's start with the suites. Can you explain to us what these potential changes are, how we're feeling about them, and what we hope, you and I hope, to see on the 21st?
Yeah, absolutely. So the suites change is actually somewhat technical. And not only is it somewhat technical, it's happening in the context of all the RCG. The RCG repeal goes into place on the 4th. So what's going to happen is there are rules for suites right now, and those rules are in most of the city. They're the rules for the RCG land use district. That land use district is reverting on August 4th to the old RC1, RC2, R1, R2, R1C, various. There's like 11 of these districts. The reversion is going to change the rules on suites from the RCG rules to the old district rules. So it's going to be a mishmash of changes all across the city, from one standardized rule for all these lots to 11 different rule sets. What council is considering doing is saying, okay, we're going to make one rule for suites across all the low density residential districts, and we're going to make it a little bit more permissive, similar to the RCG district. So they've fully repealed RCG, but they've realized that they might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just kind of killing suites as well. And so they're considering moving some of the suite rules into a more permissive framework. So what do we mean by more permissive, right? In order to understand that, you have to understand the difference between permitted use and discretionary use. So these are both types of, we'll call them allowed uses. So if you have if you have a piece of land and it's zoned, RCG, you can build a house on it. You can build a duplex. You can build a fourplex. Within those kind of allowed uses, some are what's called permitted and some are discretionary. So a permitted use says, okay, here's what a duplex looks like, for example. A duplex is a permitted use in R2. Here's what a duplex looks like. It can't be higher than this. It has to meet these building code standards. It, has to meet these design standards, these setback standards. If you design a duplex and it meets all those standards, the development authority, that's the city, must approve it. They can't sort of waffle, they can't say no. If it breaks any of those rules, if it needs like a relaxation, then they can say no, they can basically they can classify it as discretionary use. A discretionary use is a type of built form, so this is like a fourplex in RCG, that no matter what, it has to be kind of approved one by one by the city. It can also be appealed with kind of more with like broader grounds. So a permitted use can only be appealed on like technical grounds, like, oh, they made an error in classifying it, or they said it was permitted, but actually there was like a relaxation, something like that. A discretionary use can be repealed because it's like, oh, we don't like that, it's bad planning, the neighbors oppose it. You can repeal, or you can appeal it, and maybe, you know, the SDAB, the board that kind of hears appeals of city council decisions, they could kind of reject it. So really, what's going on with
importantly, I want to note that appeal, whether the appeal is rejected or accepted, or you know, whether the thing gets built or not, that adds a lot of time. And I want to note that's holding costs. It adds money. It adds cost to the project.
Exactly.
And so like that's a very notable thing that I want to highlight is how does this affect the end user? Why should just a normal person care about this? Well, it's because every single holdup makes it increasingly more expensive. That's why Edmonton is kicking our ass on housing now, is because we have so many more hoops that people have to jump through in order to get very minor housing projects built. Even I've got a stepbrother who works in construction, and he builds a lot of decks and fences and everything else. And he was telling me about some of the hoops that he has to jump through for the smallest of projects. And I was like, oh, you're telling me I know all about this from the housing perspective. And luckily, I'm not a developer, I'm not an architect. But I do have a vested interest because I live here and I want to be able to continue to afford to live here, and I want future generations to also be able to afford that, and current generations, because guess what? People alive today also need to pay for housing. So anyways, Denis, I just wanted to make that side note about why it matters to the end user. Please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it also matters to not just people looking for housing, but people who own housing and want to alter it. So right now, if you wanted to add if you want to add a basement suite to your property, basically anywhere in the city, you can just do it. You just get the specs, you apply for your building permit. You don't even have to do a development permit. You just apply directly for your building permit. You have to make sure like safety and fire code and all these things are met. There's an inspection. Boom, you can go ahead. There's no council hearing. There's no back and forth with admin. It's like, I mean, building a deck is still obnoxious, takes too much red tape, but it's that easy compared to where they want to move it, where, you know, you might need a land use change, you might need a development permit, you might need, like, it would depend on the particular zone, but there's like a ton of extra stuff you would need, and it will be appealable. And that will drag things on. It'll create risk. People may not want to do it. It can cost a lot of money. You know, we're talking thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in consulting fees and legal fees if these things kind of become contentious and drag on. So council is considering basically taking it and saying that secondary suites and backyard suites, that's like a basement suite or a suite like above the garage or in place of the garage, they are permitted use on all low-density residential districts. So RC1, RC1L, RC1N, RC2, RCG, all these districts, they'll be permitted use. Right now, secondary suites are permitted use, basement suites are permitted use everywhere through RCG, but they're going to go back to discretionary use in all the RC1 zones, all the lowest density zones. So that's a problem. That'll add a whole bunch of paperwork to anybody who wants to do a basement suite. Garage suites are permitted use in RG. So that's like RCG, but in the outer areas. So areas built since like the 2000s are zoned RG, and like kind of the older areas, more in the core, are zoned RCG. Backyard suites are still discretionary use in RCG, and they're considering changing them to a permitted use, even in the new, like all the zones that RCG is going back to. So the RC1 zone, etc., all over the city. And the reason so on secondary suites, the reason they want to do this is very straightforward. A secondary suite is not a development. It is a renovation. And it does not make sense to drag people through this really ridiculous process of applying for all these things when you're just doing a renovation. Making a secondary suite most often simply involves widening a window and adding a kitchenette. There you go. You got, and maybe like putting up an extra door. This is, I mean, there are people do bathroom renos that are more involved and expensive than this. And the only problem you really have is you need to make sure that the kitchen is done, everything, like if it's like a gas stove or whatever, everything's hooked up properly with the electrical, and the window escapes in case of fire. Those are the basic safety issues. There's no shadowing, there's no new build, there's not even really serious construction, right? Like, it's going to be more annoying if somebody's spraying their lawn or something than if somebody's doing a basement suite renovation in most cases. So there's no need for the extra red tape or the extra oversight. The building permit process addresses those safety concerns. Additionally, if you don't have the easy-to-do building permit process, people are less likely to register their suites properly, and the city doesn't know what's going on. There aren't the safety checks. That creates problems. So you don't want it. You want to kind of bring everybody into the legal suite program so that the safety checks are done for electrical and whatnot, and then you just want to cut the red tape. So we're not paying planners out of our tax dollars to look at it. We're not charging people extra fees. We're not dragging their projects on. So that's kind of the backyard, the basement suite piece of it. Just cut red tape. Cut red tape. It's better for everybody.
And on the note of, trying to make sure that we have legal suites, that people have, a safe place to live. If you want to regulate something, you have to make it easy for people to be regulated, right? Yeah. If it's not worth it for them to be regulated, they're not going to care, and they're going to do illegal suites. And it just reminds me, I think it was a couple of years ago, one of the counselors was asking, no, how many illegal basement suites are there in the city? And city admin is like, what do you mean? We don't know. They're illegal. Like, the whole thing is they're illegal. We don't know how many there are, right? And the counselor emphasized, no, but how many are there? No, you don't understand. We have no idea. We have no idea how many illegal suites there are. So you want it to be easy for people to legalize their suites. I mean, you've seen there are houses in the city that have been renovated to basically just be rooms, to just be like these boarding houses, because people oppose housing plans, right? There are 4 individual adults that live in my house currently, and we only have 2 cars between all 4 of us. Thankfully, because I choose to live car free, and one other person in this house doesn't have a driver's license. But if we're opposing housing, well, there would have been 4 cars on this street anyways, right? Even if there's not a fourplex here, there's still 4 households here. So yeah, I think it's really important to make sure that the conditions that you are setting up for your market are favorable enough that people are okay to be regulated, that they aren't cutting corners because it's not worth it to cut corners, and it's worth it for them to just do things the right way, right?
Yeah, you just, in any policy discussion, you have to be pragmatic about, if you're going to implement a rule, are we going to be able to enforce it? Are people either going to comply because it's easy, or do we have the resources and the time and the political willingness to enforce it? Because you could enforce secondary suites. You could send a building inspector around to everybody in Calgary's house and see if they have a secondary suite. Do an investigation. Nobody's going to like that. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to be very unpleasant. Nobody wants the city inspector coming to check out their basement. So, better to just have a program that people are willing to participate in, that makes sense, that's quick, efficient, easy, and low cost. Much better. The other reason, too, is that secondary basement suites are just a good form of highly flexible, affordable housing. They can be brought online really quick because they're just a renovation rather than like building a new structure. So in a really tough housing market, maybe it's not worth it for somebody to rent out their basement if they're going to get $500 or $600 a month. If they're going to get $1,200 a month, they're going to rethink that. And so that housing can come online in the right circumstances and make the market more responsive. So that's the good thing about secondary suites. The other piece is the garage suites. So, you may have seen something like this. It's like basically a house above somebody's garage, like a little mini house. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people call them granny flats. And this is a very different kind of housing. So first of all, it's actually like a slightly pricey piece of housing, because in order to go into somebody's backyard and like construct this kind of like unique boutique little house set up for the specific context of that backyard and whatever garage foundation they're building it on, you have to do like its own design, and it ends up being like kind of pricey for what it is. But there's an important reason why people do these suites. And the stats aren't really good in this, but in the jurisdictions where they check, the majority of them have a family member living in them. And of the remaining portion, a significant portion of those are friends. So these are people building housing, most often for a family member who needs some kind of support, or building housing or adding housing and then like kind of not renting it out on the market, renting it out through their personal network. Because it's a little bit different to have like a stranger in your backyard than it is to have your mother-in-law or your buddy for a long time whose company went under or something and could use a break on his rent, something like that. So often what's going on here is this is homeowners using their property to house their family or their social circle. So it's a much more personal thing. This isn't as much, there are some people who do it for economic reasons, but it's much more commonly to be done for kind of personal reasons. And so there's kind of a moral dimension here where it's like, wait a second, aren't I allowed to use my property to house my family? Are you telling me that if my mother-in-law is sick and we need to have her close to care for her, that I can't put her in a house that I build with my own money on my own property? That is crazy to me. That's crazy. That is, and we're seeing this. There's a woman who spoke at council last time, Cheryl Sellinger. She's a planner by profession, but she doesn't work sort of in this area. But she was building, she told, said publicly, told this story to council. She is building a garage suite for her son who has a disability. And her son will be able to live in that garage suite largely independently if she can actually get it built. And in the long term, he may have to live in some kind of supported housing, which is taxpayer supported, if she's not able to build that suite. And she's actually having a really tough time getting it. Now, I think she's going to succeed, but she's having a tough time getting it through approvals. That's not the outcome we want. We want it to be the case that somebody wants to build a suite in their property. And notice, as taxpayers, like everybody, there's one taxpayer, we all pay federal, provincial, and municipal taxes. We want people who are willing to put money and their own time into supporting or caring for family members to do that work, instead of them having to go into an institution where now we're having to pay quite a lot of money. And frankly, the outcomes are much worse for them, much worse in those institutional settings. So that's sort of the story in garage suites. There aren't a lot of garage suites approved a year. It's like 250. So this isn't a big piece, but you could get some improvement. You could also get some improvement in new developments. It would be nice to see more of these duplex developments adding a garage suite. Maybe some of them don't want to add a basement suite, whatever. You can add a garage suite. That's a good thing. Another opportunity to put a little bit more housing in.
Yeah, and I like options. I think it sounds nice, right?
Yeah. And so moving that to permitted, the other thing they're trying to do here is that the vast majority, like 90 or 95% of the garage suites that get approved with a relaxation because they didn't write the rules properly. And I won't go through all the details, and these are old rules, so things got changed. But one thing is, you don't have to count stairs as part of your floor area, but you do have to count an elevator, which sounds crazy, right? Look, they have an exemption for stairs in the floor area rules because they don't really count as floor area. But sometimes you're building this for somebody who's in a wheelchair. Like, that's part of the point. They need to be close to the family. So they try to put in elevators. Only a couple cases of this, but they couldn't make the building work because the elevator counted as floor area. So then they needed a relaxation. There's another rule about the way like the roof slope works. And it was like made before the way they do the garage suites now. And so they give them all of them relaxations on like the roof slope rule. And it doesn't really matter. Like, nobody cares about how it works. but it messes up their, it sends them all into discretionary use. So they're tweaking a couple rules. They also have a weird rule with, they say you can build 75 meters squared, but you can also build 10% more than 75 meters squared in most cases. That's a crazy way to do it. They're just moving it to 82.5 meters squared. That's 75 plus 10%, which is like the standard. They're hoping to get everything so that the majority of suites being built, they're by the rules and are not causing any problems. They're trying to get those into the spot where they won't need relaxations. And then they can just go in the permitted use category and quick and easy, just get it done. A few of these things, they irritate somebody. They're a little too high. They're peering into the neighbor's yard or something. Some of the people who are concerned about this brought several cases forward of this. Those are the ones that get relaxations. They have a relaxation to go higher, to have a window where they normally wouldn't. Right now, because like everything's discretionary, there's not a lot of incentive for the developer to stay in the rules. If you do a little change or if you do a big change, you count as discretionary, and you still have to wind its way through the extra discretionary process. Moving it to permitted makes it so if you do the core stuff right, you get fast-tracked, and now more people will move themselves into the core stuff instead of getting these relaxations to do weird stuff, because there's actually a permitted, follow the rules track. So I think one of the other things that have been is hopeful is that they can continue to reduce the kind of planning load and speed things up by getting these suites into these kind of like fast-tracked, more efficient regulatory channels.
That's interesting, and I think that would be great. So something that we're going to be doing today is making sure that we have the link to sign up to speak in the show notes. Denis, if you were speaking on the suites issue, would you be in favor or against?
I'm in favor of the change.
In favor of the changes.
I think that, so for two reasons. One for each suite. I think both suite types are good. And so I'm in favor of the changes because I want to make it easier and faster and lower cost to build them. I want to pay less on my property taxes to pay planners to go over suites that I think should be approved anyway and should just be fast tracked, do the safety check, and let's go. The reason I like basement suites is they're a flexible, effective form of housing. I saved a lot of money when I was an undergraduate student. I paid $460 a month for a one-bedroom basement suite all to myself, near transit, 30 minutes from my classes. Great. It helped me so much starting off my life, and we need more of those basement suite options, and we should make it easier and cheaper and faster to do it. On the garage suite piece, I don't think it's going to be a critical source. Every bit helps, but it won't be a key source of housing. What garage suites do is they give people that option to care for their family members. That's the most common use. I think people just have the moral right to use their private property to care for their family members. And a garage suite is an appropriate way to do it, and we shouldn't put paperwork in front of them. It's one of the most appalling things I've seen at City Council, that Cheryl Selinger, who's trying to care for her disabled son on her own property, is given the regulatory runaround by our system. That is, that's sort of not like a policy issue so much for me as like a basic moral issue. And I think anybody who's serious about property rights thinks that part of your property rights on your own property is having the right to care for your family and your property if that's what they need. And sometimes the garage suite is what they need.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with you on all accounts there. And I also think it's important that, it's not a significant part of what we do, but it frees up the time of city council, of planners, of everybody else involved in these processes to do other things that I think we would all agree are more important, more significant. Any closing thoughts on that, or are you ready to move on to the RCG stuff?
No, suites are good. Let's stop wasting time on them.
Yeah, I concur. So let's talk about RCG. And the changes, I feel like we're never going to start. I'm going to be on my deathbed. I'm going to be 100 years old and just talking to people about RCG because it's never ending talking about this land use zone. Can you fill us in on a bit of the history here and then where we're at now and what this changes specifically? Because I think a lot of people might be asking, wait a second, I thought that we did this. I thought we had a public hearing about RCG. Why are we having another conversation about RCG, Denis?
Yeah, so this was a motionerizing or maybe a referral to administration. Basically, as part of the RCG change, they got rid of RCG like throughout most of the city by reversing the rezoning, by basically blanket downzoning the city. But they also went into the RCG zone and made changes to basically make it worse. So they reduced the lot coverage, they reduced the height, they made it they made it so you could build less housing through the RCG. Now, these are small changes, so they didn't like kill the zone, they just made it a little bit worse. They also considered changing it so you could only build 3 row houses, not 4 on RCG lots. And they decided not to do that because they didn't want to kind of make that change without considering the implications right on the council floor. There was some disagreement among the councillors about what that change would actually amount to. So they told admin, okay, go study this and bring it back to the July hearing. So admin studied it, they consulted with industry, and they brought it back with a slightly tweaked way of doing it. They said, okay, if you want to make it triplexes only, you can change the units per hectare allowance in RCG from 75 to 60. Sometimes UPH, units per hectare, how many units of housing you can put per hectare on the land. The way that works out is it makes it so you can't build fourplexes, you can only build triplexes. They consulted with the industry, and industry said if you do that, it kills the zone. Because fourplexes you can build, like they're financially viable, triplexes are not. Why is a triplex not financially viable when a fourplex is and a duplex is? It's sort of an interesting question. And the reason is, it's a policy reason. When you move from a duplex to a triplex, you're sort of moving regulatory buckets. You're moving from like basic housing to multi-unit housing. And you trigger a whole bunch of regulatory changes and regulatory charges. So you have to have better fireproofing on your walls. You have to have a cistern to collect stormwater. You have to, instead of just like letting it drain wherever, like through the grass, you have to pay additional fees around like the connections for the electrical and the stormwater. And there's a great deal more of this. It gets quite complex fairly quickly. Moving from that kind of basic bucket to that multi-unit bucket adds about $145,000 of cost per unit. So if you do 4, and that's like when you're comparing a triplex to a fourplex, like you have to, so the triplexes cost like that much more each, and that just doesn't sell. People are just going to spend a little bit more and buy a duplex. And so they just won't build triplexes. You'll only ever get the duplex units. It's still going to be the same size, but they're going to be bigger houses, and they're going to sell for 1.1 million. And it's missing that. Now, we need to build lots of duplexes too. Calgary's a wealthy city. There's also people who can afford $1 or $1.1 million houses, and that's what they want to buy. But we're missing that 700,000 kind of missing middle housing when we don't let people build those row houses. So there is not a lot of RCG left in the city. There's some RCG in Banff Trail and Bowness, a few inner city areas. There's some RCG that got like rezoned and then built into RCG, so it'll get changed in a weird way. Like you'll have like a fourplex that will then be illegal on the land that it's built on. It'll be grandfathered in, like it's not like they have to tear it down, but if they want to redevelop it, they couldn't redevelop it in 20, 30 years. They'd have to like apply for another land use change. So it's just sort of like a little bit silly in that sense, and it destroys the ability to develop that already RCG approved land from rezonings that happened, well before. It also makes it so that anybody who wants to build a fourplex, they can't really do it now unless they go really big. They have to go up to HCO or MCG, which are more expansive land use districts that allow you to do kind of additional stuff. And so sometimes they're going to do that anyway, but there's going to be these set of kind of like intermediate lots which can fit more than a duplex. It's a bit much to go for an HCO. And so they're just not going to get redeveloped. They'll get redeveloped into a duplex. Or some of them people will try HGO, and then some of them will succeed and it'll be super big and people will hate it. And some of them will fail and the developer will lose money and there'll be uncertainty. And so it just makes the system like less thoughtful and reasonable and kind of stepped because they're killing the zone. So that's why they say, don't do it. It looks to me like the councillors realize this just doesn't make any sense. And so they're going to vote it down. But it's important we show up and remind them, like, look, you can decline an RCG rezoning if you don't think a fourplex belongs there. But don't say no fourplexes anywhere. Like, what are you talking about? Why would you do that?
Yeah. Well, and notably, I mean, this would make it a dead zone. Nobody would use RCG. It would just be useless. And like you said, people would go up to MCG. People would go to HGO instead, which I think HGO is a better zone in a lot of ways. I personally think the whole city should have been rezoned to at least HGO. But that's my personal take on that. And killing RCG so that it becomes entirely useless as a zone, I think it would have not just negative effects on housing affordability. This council is already gung-ho about killing affordability of housing across the city. But it would also have like negative effects as to what their individual goals are as a council that is quite regressive. Their hope that they've reduced development in neighborhoods, well, this won't do that. Their hope that developments will be neater and cleaner and nicer, or whatever their phrasing of it might be, won't do that, because now instead of having RCG, you're going to have the 12-meter HGO, which, by the way, is not a big deal. There's a few going down the street from me. It's fine. So, I think this is just a second thing that we're going to have to sign up for. So are we encouraging people to sign up to speak at council twice in one meeting?
Three times, actually.
My goodness, Denis, three times to speak in one council meeting. Well, I hope people are ready to sit and enjoy their popcorn and drag this out. We'll see how long this council meeting goes for. But maybe let's jump on to the last point of conversation here as we wrap up the show. What is this last thing that we want people to sign up to speak on?
Yeah, so it's a affordable homes development at 108 Mission Road, southwest, 108 Mission Road. I think there's only one Mission Road. It is quite close to Earlton Station along the Red Line. And it's on this kind of Mission Road, kind of like winds its way like 4th Street, and kind of like goes into like, Elbow Park, that area around the river. And it's kind of winding its way along. And at 108 Mission Road, there is an old NMAX, like step-down station or something, an old NMAX building. And it's kind of built into a hill, kind of in the curve in the road. Yeah, there you go. At Earlton, right by Earlton Terrace.
Yeah, and it's actually a little bit closer to 39th Ave station.
Oh, okay, it's closer to
down
39th
here.
Ave.
Yeah. If people are watching the video, you can see I've got the map pulled up. Earlton Station is up there, and 108 Mission Road.
And the 15, if you see that bus stop there, that's the 15. So that goes up to the downtown into the train line, and then goes down, winds its way through some of the industrial area, and then all the way down to I think Southland Station at the farther down on the Red Line. So it's
and this is a new bus route, by the way, and actually has some decent use already. Like it's a pretty handy bus route for a lot of people, from what I understand.
Excellent. That is good to know. Yeah, so this place has really fantastic transit coverage. And the reason they're considering building 61 units of affordable housing on there is because it was an old NMAX station. NMAX, the city owned it, somebody owned it, some government or government-related entity owned it, and it got put into the kind of land program for affordable housing developments. because it was in that land program, Onward Homes, this provider of affordable housing, was able to get it at a reduced cost or perhaps free. I'm not quite sure the details, but they were also able to align funding. So they got federal funding, I think also provincial funding. This is it's a taxpayer funded project, but it's not just city taxpayer. It's kind of more broad. They're going to put in 61 units of affordable housing in this transit-oriented area, and the neighbors do not like it. And the neighbors don't like it for a couple of reasons. 3, really. It's kind of built onto a hill, and there's like a bit of a slope in the road, so they think it's going to be disruptive. My understanding is that the traffic studies show that's not actually going to be a problem. The other reason that I would think it's not going to be a problem is that people who need affordable housing, they don't usually have cars. When they make affordable housing developers put in a bunch of parking spots, they end up being wildly undersubscribed, and they have to like rent them out on the market in order to make use of them, because people aren't, if you can't afford rent, you probably can't afford a car, basically.
Well, and on that note, it also is expensive to build parking stalls. If you want to build deeply affordable housing, the number one most important, fastest, easiest way to make housing more affordable is no parking. Parking is bad for the cost of housing.
Yeah.
So this is critical.
Yeah. And the other reason they were worried about like the height and the shadowing, all the usual stuff. It does kind of, it's like adjacent to some backyards, because the street that's perpendicular to Mission Road, the houses on that street back on to this lot. But they said, okay, they like didn't put any balconies or windows, or maybe some windows with frosting. So they kind of like protected people's privacy on that side. They built it into the hill, so it's not kind of like looming over the crescent above it. So I think they did a quite job. They started at 6 and they knocked it down to 5. I think they did a quite a good job of accommodating the neighbors. Personally, I would have said 6. Suck it up. People need somewhere to live, but whatever. They played nice with the community, right? They cannot go further, is my understanding, because like 61 is the minimum for their funding levels. But I don't, disclaimer, I do not work at Onward Homes. I'm just reviewing the public documentation on this. There's also like a little like dead end street at the top of the property, and right now, if you look on Google Maps, you can see that like people are using the top of the property as kind of like a turnaround for that dead end street. And this part gets me. They don't want that turnaround to go away. They have like a free little gravel turnaround. They say it's like a safety issue. It's going to cause problems on the street. Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, look, I don't want that's my land too. I'm a taxpayer. That public land isn't your private turnaround. It's for what we need it for, and your private turnaround is less important than putting people in affordable housing. So, and we're already paying for it through our federal and provincial taxes. So what are we doing here? Let's get it built. And finally, they didn't want car access to the building on the kind of crescent off of Mission Road, because then they figure, okay, there'll be all this traffic going back and forth, all these people driving in and out. So the affordable housing group Onward said, fine. It'll be foot traffic, foot access only. So you could like drop somebody off, or you could like walk in or bike in and like go down like a ramp or something and get access to the door. But you can't, there's no access to the parking from that side. So the car traffic will only be out in front and it won't disturb the people on the crescent. So they really accommodated them. But these folks they've lawyered up. They're going to show up and oppose it. And we're actually hearing now it might be delayed because this hearing is just going to be such a zoo. So somebody might choose to kind of kick it forward a hearing. I don't have any special insight to that. We'll basically find out in the chamber what's going to happen. But there is still a real possibility it goes forward. So I recommend folks sign up for this one as well. And, we're just in a situation where in Q1, we built like 40 units of affordable housing or 50 units of affordable housing. We're supposed to build like 750 a quarter to hit our goals. Last year, we built like 1,250 a quarter, which was not great, but better than 50 a quarter. If we kill this project and keep killing other affordable housing projects, I don't know how we're going to get anything built.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes without saying that the city council is shit on housing. And I really, I've been personally impressed with some of the interest that they've shown in transit, which is really great. But the city is more complicated than a single issue. The city is a lot more complicated than what your individual voters, what your donors, what your supporters care about. And the city will be here beyond you. The city, like I hope that this city lasts longer than my lifetime and your lifetime and the lifetimes of everybody listening. And in order for it to do that, we have to take into account a bigger picture. We have to be willing to compromise and accept change and accept that things are not always going to be exactly how you like. And guess what? People need housing. And so we encourage everybody to sign up at the link below. There are 3 items here. We'll put some details in there on what to fill in the form. If this is going to be your first time speaking at council, that will be especially helpful. And if it's not your first time speaking at council, well, I can't wait to see you again, and and maybe go for lunch or something. But thank you, Denis. Any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
No. Happy Stampede. See people at council. Let's keep advocating for housing.
Amen. Thank you.